All right. So, welcome back. So, today we're going to talk about getting organized with 5S. And as you may be aware, or maybe you're not, I actually have written a book recently on this topic of 5S. The title of that book is 5S Mastery. And, I released that book back in September of this year. So just a few months ago. Um, and the primary focus of the book is obviously on the 5S methodology, which when you apply into a physical or digital environment, does have the potential to create a system or systems that really boost productivity, can reduce your stress levels, and helps you locate items that you need in seconds, whether that's like a digital file or a physical, you know, item. Um, and contrary to what most typically, write about or think about when they think of 5S, this is something that is not restricted to large scale manufacturing, right? So it's something that can be applied to businesses of any size, as well as in the home, if you really wanted to. I mean, it's a system that works pretty much anywhere and with any scalability. Um, so for those of you that may not fully understand what 5S is, it's a methodology designed to bring order and chaos from, the like this is the environment you find yourself in. And traditionally, this system is taught with five key components, right? So there's sort, set in order, shine, standardize, and sustain. This methodology originated in post World War II Japan. And 5S really aimed to keep the manufacturing spaces efficient, safe, organized, competitive. And Toyota was really leading the way in its implementation. And, as this methodology spread across Japan and eventually the globe, Western organizations encountered cultural nuances that led to mixed results when trying to adopt it. So, in my book, 5S Mastery, I present a reimagined approach to this framework and, draws from my research and understanding of, what I've learned about Japanese language and culture as it relates to this methodology. And, one significant challenge in implementing the traditional model that I've discovered throughout my career is that many times there's a lack of an established standard and some type of documentation for the process when you're trying to implement this system. And, the big cultural difference is that in many Japanese companies, there are very clear standards and standard work that are created on day one before even thinking about, pulling 5S into the mix. And um, by doing so, you really allow for a smoother integration into, being able to standardize and then be able to go through, those other phases of the work. Conversely, I think you know, like I said, a lot of companies and organizations I've worked with and worked for tend to overlook or undervalue the importance of having good documentation and standards in place. And because of that gap, it tends to leave, you know, this process without a solid foundation when trying to implement 5S. So, what I've done with my new book is proposed a reimagined framework, which starts with standardizing, because I think if you don't have that foundation, it makes it super difficult to figure out what in the world you're supposed to sort and set in order, right? If you kind of compare that to the original framework. And also, I think it's really hard to do a lot of sorting and setting in order if things aren't clean. And so that's why I put spotless second, which I've kind of renamed from Shine because I don't think Shine fully captures the essence of the concept behind the word that shine gets translated into, really should think about it more in the context of like a sanitizing type clean, right? Which shine is, I don't know if that necessarily captures that essence, you know, really great. Um, and then you transition into the sort and set an order because now you've got this standard you've built, you have a clean workspace, and now it becomes really easy to figure out, okay, what do I need to sort? What things need to go? What things need to stay in order to support the standard I've built? And and then you can transition into organizing those things that need to stay behind. And then finally, you transition instead of the traditional translation of sustain, which I think really misses the mark on this one. Shitsuke really, you know, when you break it down into its core, it's really about self-discipline. And so that's the fifth S that I've uh, used in the Reimagine framework. Um, and Taiichi Ono once said, "Without standards, there can be no Kaizen." And for those of you that understand what Kaizen means, it's really this mindset around a continual drive for improvement. And so if you don't have a standard you're starting with, how can you even think about making any improvement to it? And so that's why I think the original framework of, starting with sort, set in order, and then shine seems really backwards to me, which is why I think in some cases there's been really mixed results on implementing this system. So let's talk a little bit about the practicality of this methodology. And so 5S is it's more than just tidying up. It creates a system that enhances efficiency, it saves time, keeps spaces organized. And think to yourself, like, how often have you struggled to find things only to eventually discover it's underneath other things? I can't tell you how many times that has happened to me. But every time I end up feeling like, man, I wasted so much valuable time looking for something that you know, I could have used that time for something way more important. And, maybe there's an instance of, somebody meaning well, moved some of your things and then you couldn't find them because there was no established and agreed upon location to put the things. And so no matter what it is, when you feel like you're wasting time, like nobody enjoys that, right? Like I don't think I've ever met anybody that enjoyed wasting time. And so I've found implementing this methodology is a really great way to reduce on that feeling of, man, I'm just wasting my time. Um, so a few tips, right, of being able to implement 5S mastery. Use the analogy of our kitchen at home to kind of set the set the stage for how you could implement this in some, any other business or part of your home or whatever. And so if you think about uh, this as being able to start small, develop the right habits, and then muscle memory that goes with it, and then it's easy to transfer to another small area. If you try to go too big, you'll just get overwhelmed and give up and say, man, this methodology doesn't work. So keep it small, right? I think that's like big pro tip that I'll give you. But kind of going back to the kitchen analogy, so first you would start with standardizing, right? So you'd be like, okay, so this kitchen area, right? We need to make sure that we've identified whatever, checklist or daily routine that needs to be in place in order to establish like a good flow of activity in this room. And, no matter how you go about it, the important thing is that whoever is connected to this work, everybody needs to know their roles and responsibilities, right? So you need to write it down somewhere. So it's very clear for everybody to know, oh, okay, this is what I'm responsible for. Um, and then you would transition into spotless, right? So this is all about making sure that cleanliness, right, is happening and ensuring that space remains functional. Um, and here would be an opportunity to create another standard, right? A cleaning checklist, right? And this is where you can kind of, you know, practice with it and say, oh, do we need to adjust it? Are we missing things? Like there's going to be a little iterative approach there, but you would basically highlight the key tasks that need to be done, like wiping down counters or mopping the floor, etc. And then you would go into that sort and set an order phase. So once you have a clean area, you understand where things are supposed to be in terms of a flow and standardization piece. Then you can start thinking about, okay, well, I think it becomes much easier to then start sorting the things out and say, well, if the flow here needs to meet certain criteria, like I want to be able to um, cook dinner without feeling overwhelmed, or I want to be able to find things without having to move around the kitchen too much, then you can start figuring out where to put things. And I think an example of why it's important to keep it clean is think about this. If a knife is missing from your knife block in a messy kitchen, it's not super easy to figure out where it is, right? I mean, is it in the sink? Is it underneath a pile of other dirty dishes? Or, who knows, right? And so, but in a clean space, if the knife is missing, it's usually, pretty easy to figure out where it went. And so your utensil drawer would definitely fall under the same kind of category. Um, but what tends to happen when you have this standard set of like, this is what I want to be able to do in this space, right? And then you keep it clean, and then you start sorting out the things that don't belong, right? Or the things that you don't need anymore. So it's really a great opportunity to figure out what things have just been collecting dust, right? And let's get them out of here. So that's not preventing me from doing the things that I really want to do. And then it's all about self discipline and maintaining that system that you've built and establishing a follow up like schedule for yourself to figure out, okay, am I actually keeping the kitchen clean? If there's other people involved in it, are we, making sure that things get returned to where we all agreed they need to go? And as you build that consistency, right? And you start seeing those tangible results and feeling less overwhelmed when you go to your kitchen to make a meal. Now you can start tackling other areas, right? You can start organizing the garage, which I think everybody would agree is probably a pretty massive undertaking in some cases. But you could also think about applying it to an office space. But really, the key is to carve out manageable chunks and try not to take on too much at once, right? So it's little bits at a time. Really kind of supports the idea of a Kaizen mindset as well, right? It's that incremental, continual improvement of an area or process, right? And so it's not about massive change, right? Massive change is super hard to maintain. It's super hard to not resist it also, right? Because it's just such a deviation from where you currently are. So I'll drop a link to my 5S book in the show notes, and you can go check it out if you want. And next time we're going to be exploring some, deeper um, ideas around self-discipline that are inspired from my first book that I wrote, Always Improving Lessons from the Samurai. And so stay tuned for that coming out in the next few weeks here. And yeah, I think we've reached the end of another one-sided conversation here. So if you have any thoughts or comments you want to share, please, drop them in the comments. And yeah, if you liked what you're listening to, I'd appreciate if you hit a like on the video. And so with that, I will talk to you soon. I'm going to leave you with a quote from Benjamin Franklin. For every minute spent organizing, an hour is earned.